The moment Patricia Hartwell stepped out of that silver sedan with 3 designer suitcases and a grin that could cut glass, I knew my life was about to shatter. She didn't knock. She didn't call ahead. She walked straight up my driveway like she owned it, pulled out a key I'd never given her, and announced to my stunned face that she was moving in permanently. Not visiting. Not staying a few days. Moving in. As the new owner. Her words, not mine. I stood there in my own doorway, coffee mug still warm in my hand, watching this woman I'd spent 5 years trying to please stride past me like I was the guest. That's when I realized something I should have known years ago. Some people don't ask for your life. They just take it. What happened next wasn't about family loyalty or keeping the peace. It was about survival. And it started the moment I dialed those 3 numbers and said the words that would change everything. My name is Natalie Brooks, and this is the story of how I learned that protecting your peace sometimes means going to war. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. August heat clung to Richmond like a second skin that summer. The kind of heat that made the air shimmer above the asphalt and turned your car into an oven if you left it in the sun for more than 10 minutes. I'd been working from home for 3 years by then, my little office tucked into the corner bedroom with windows that overlooked the backyard garden I'd spent 2 seasons nurturing. Tomatoes hung heavy on their vines. Basil sprawled in terracotta pots. The zinnia I planted in spring had finally bloomed into bursts of orange and pink that made me smile every time I glanced outside during video calls. Kevin had left for Charlotte that morning, another week-long sales trip that had become routine in our marriage. He'd kissed my forehead in that distracted way he did when his mind was already on the highway, promised to call when he landed the account, and backed out of the driveway before the sun had fully risen. I'd watched him go from the porch swing, coffee steaming in my hands, grateful for the quiet. Our house in Westwood Hills was exactly what I'd dreamed of when we'd signed the papers 2 years earlier. 3 bedrooms, hardwood floors that glowed honeygold in the afternoon light, an open kitchen where I could cook and still see into the living room. It wasn't massive, but it was mine. Ours. The first place that had ever felt like it belonged to me, and not to someone else's vision of what my life should look like. I'd grown up in apartments where the walls were thin enough to hear neighbors arguing and landlords who painted over problems instead of fixing them. Owning a home meant something to me that I couldn't quite explain to people who'd grown up with equity and inheritance and parents who helped with down payments. This house was proof. Proof that I'd built something. Proof that the late nights finishing my degree while working full-time had mattered. Proof that the girl who'd eaten ramen for dinner 4 nights a week to save for a security deposit had made it to the other side. Patricia had never understood that. From the moment Kevin and I started dating, she'd made it clear that her vision of his life didn't include someone like me. Not poor exactly, but not from the right kind of family. Not connected to the right social circles in Lynchburg where she'd lived for 30 years and knew everyone worth knowing. At our engagement party, she'd pulled me aside in her kitchen and told me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes that Kevin had always dated women with more substantial backgrounds. I'd smiled back and said that was probably why none of them had worked out. She hadn't spoken to me for 3 months after that. The wedding was a Cold War dressed in lace and roses. She'd insisted on inviting twice as many people as Kevin and I wanted, then complained loudly about how we'd chosen a venue that was too far from Lynchburg for her friends to attend comfortably. She'd worn cream to the ceremony, close enough to white that people noticed, far enough that she could deny any ill intent. During the reception, she'd given a toast that managed to praise Kevin for 10 minutes without mentioning my name once. I'd sat there in my wedding dress, watching guests shift uncomfortably, and told myself it would get better once we were married. Once she saw that I made her son happy. Once she understood that I wasn't trying to take him away from her. I'd been wrong about that. The first year of marriage, she'd called Kevin every single day. Sometimes twice. Little emergencies that always seemed to happen when he and I were trying to have dinner together or spend a weekend away. The washing machine was making a noise. The neighbor's tree was dropping leaves in her yard. She'd seen a suspicious car drive past her house. Could Kevin come check? Could Kevin call someone? Could Kevin stop by? And Kevin, raised to believe that a good son always answered when his mother called, would sigh and pick up the phone and talk her through whatever crisis she'd invented that day. When we bought the house in Westwood Hills, I thought distance might help. 2 hours between Richmond and Lynchburg. Far enough that she couldn't just drop by. Close enough that Kevin wouldn't feel guilty about the gap. For a few months it worked. She complained about how far away we'd moved, how inconvenient it was for family gatherings, how we'd clearly chosen Richmond because I wanted to isolate Kevin from his family. But she stayed in Lynchburg. She stayed in her ranch-style house with the fence Robert had built before he died, and the garden club ladies who came over for bridge on Thursday afternoons. I'd started to breathe easier. Started to believe that maybe the hardwood floors and the garden and the quiet mornings with coffee on the porch could be mine without her shadow falling across them. Then Robert's life insurance money came through. Kevin mentioned it casually one night while we were doing dishes. His dad had kept a small policy, nothing enormous, but enough that Patricia wouldn't have to worry about the mortgage for a while. Enough that she was thinking about selling the Lynchburg house and maybe buying something smaller, easier to maintain. I'd nodded, scrubbing pasta sauce off a plate, only half listening. It didn't occur to me to worry. It didn't occur to me that Patricia had already decided what easier to maintain meant. The Tuesday she arrived, I was on a video call with a client in Denver going over project timelines and deliverables. My home office faced the street, and I'd positioned my desk so the window was behind me, natural light making me look more professional on camera. I saw the silver sedan pull into the driveway through the corner of my eye, but didn't think much of it. Maybe a delivery. Maybe someone turning around. Then I heard the car door slam. Then another. Then a third. I glanced over my shoulder and froze. Patricia was standing in my driveway in a pale blue linen pantsuit, sunglasses perched on her head, directing someone to pull suitcases from the trunk. Not overnight bags. Suitcases. The kind you take when you're moving. My client was still talking, something about adjusting the launch date to account for vendor delays. But her voice had turned into static in my ears. I watched Patricia smooth her hair, check her reflection in the car window, then start walking toward my front door with the confidence of someone who'd been invited. I heard the doorbell ring once, twice. Then I heard something that made my stomach drop. The sound of a key sliding into a lock. The sound of my front door opening. I interrupted my client mid-sentence. "I'm so sorry, there's an emergency. I have to go. I'll email you this afternoon." I didn't wait for her response. I closed the laptop and moved through the house in a fog of disbelief. By the time I reached the living room, Patricia was already inside, standing in my entryway. Suitcases lined up behind her like soldiers. She'd removed her sunglasses and was looking around my living room with an expression I'd seen her use when inspecting hotel rooms. Critical. Assessing. Already finding flaws. "Patricia." My voice came out steady, which surprised me given that my heart was trying to beat its way out of my chest. "What are you doing here?" She turned to me with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Natalie. Good you're home. I was hoping we could talk before I started settling in." Settling in. The words hung in the air like smoke. I stared at the suitcases. 3 of them. Large. Expensive. Packed full. "I don't understand. Kevin didn't mention you were visiting." Her laugh was light, practiced, the kind she used at church functions when she wanted to seem approachable. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm not visiting. I'm moving in. Permanently. This works out perfectly for everyone." The room tilted slightly. I gripped the back of the sofa to steady myself. "You're what?" Patricia set her purse down on my coffee table like she'd done it 1,000 times before. "I sold the Lynchburg house. Got a wonderful offer well above asking. And rather than buy some cramped condo where I don't know anyone, I realized the obvious solution was right here. You and Kevin have all this extra space. That guest room barely gets used. And with Kevin traveling so much, you must get lonely. This way we're family under one roof. It's what Robert would have wanted." She said it so casually, so matter-of-factly, like she was describing a dinner plan or a weekend trip, not announcing that she was moving into my home without asking, without warning, without permission. "Patricia, you can't just move in here. This is our house. Kevin and I bought this house." Her expression shifted, something cold sliding behind her eyes. "Actually, darling, that's what I wanted to discuss. I did some research, and it turns out that because Kevin co-signed on the original mortgage and I helped with part of the down payment as a wedding gift, I have a legitimate claim to partial ownership. My attorney assures me that I'm well within my rights to live here." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The floor dropped out from under me. The down payment. The $5,000 she'd given us at the wedding in a card that said "for your future home." I thought it was a gift. A peace offering. A sign that maybe she was trying to accept me into the family. Kevin had deposited it with our savings, and we'd rolled it into the down payment along with everything we'd scraped together over 3 years. $5,000 out of $42,000 total. Barely more than 10%. That was a gift. My voice was shaking now. You gave that to us as a wedding present. There was no agreement. No contract. Patricia's smile widened. Gifts can be reinterpreted, dear. Especially when family circumstances change. I'm sure Kevin will explain it to you when he gets home. He already knows I'm coming. I texted him this morning. The betrayal hit me like cold water. Kevin knew. He'd kissed me goodbye this morning, walked out to his car, driven away, and he'd known his mother was planning to show up at our house with suitcases and claim ownership. He hadn't warned me, hadn't called, hadn't given me a chance to prepare or protest or even process. I pulled my phone from my pocket with shaking hands and opened my messages. Nothing from Kevin. I scrolled up to earlier that morning. His last text had been at 6:15. Made it to the highway. Love you. I typed quickly, fingers clumsy on the screen. Your mother is here with suitcases saying she's moving in. Did you know about this? The message delivered. I watched the screen. No response. No 3 dots indicating he was typing. Nothing. Patricia had moved toward the hallway, peering into rooms like she was conducting a tour. I'll take the guest room at the end of the hall. It has the better light and I'll need space for my things. We can move that exercise equipment you're not using into the garage. I'll also need to rearrange the kitchen. I noticed you keep the spices in the wrong cabinet. Alphabetical organization is much more efficient. She was talking about my house. My kitchen. My space that I'd organized and arranged and lived in for 2 years. She was talking about it like it was already hers. Something in me snapped. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But completely. Patricia. Stop. I need you to listen to me very carefully. You cannot move into this house. I don't care what you think you're entitled to. I don't care what your attorney told you. This is my home. Mine and Kevin's. And you are not moving in. She turned to face me fully, and for the first time since she'd arrived, the pleasant mask slipped. Her eyes went hard. Don't take that tone with me, young lady. I am Kevin's mother. I have every right to be in my son's home. This isn't your son's home. It's our home. And you don't have a key. How did you even get in? She reached into her purse and pulled out a silver key on a plain ring. Kevin had one made for me last month. For emergencies. In case something happened and you couldn't get to the door. The lies were piling up so fast I couldn't breathe under the weight of them. Kevin wouldn't do that. He wouldn't give her a key without telling me. He wouldn't agree to let her move in without discussing it with me first. Except somewhere deep down, in a place I didn't want to examine too closely, I knew he might. Kevin had spent 32 years learning to say yes to his mother. Learning that her feelings mattered more than his boundaries. Learning that peace meant surrender. I looked at Patricia standing in my living room surrounded by her suitcases, and I saw the next 10 years of my life. Her voice in every decision. Her opinions on every choice. Her presence in every corner of the home I'd built. I saw myself shrinking. Accommodating. Swallowing frustration until it turned into something bitter and permanent. I saw my marriage crumbling under the weight of a woman who would never believe I was good enough for her son, and I realized I had a choice. I could call Kevin and beg him to fix this. I could cry and argue and try to make Patricia see reason. I could let this happen and tell myself it was temporary, that we'd figure it out, that family meant compromise. Or I could draw a line. I pulled my phone out again, but this time I didn't call my husband. I dialed 911. Patricia's eyes went wide. What are you doing? The dispatcher answered on the second ring. 911, what's your emergency? My voice came out calmer than I felt. I need police assistance at my home. There's someone who's entered my property without permission and is refusing to leave. Patricia's face went white, then red. You're calling the police on me? On family? The dispatcher was asking for my address. I gave it clearly, steadily. 32 Ashford Lane, Westwood Hills. The person is my mother-in-law. She has suitcases and claims she's moving in, but this is my property and I have not given her permission to be here. Ma'am, is anyone in immediate danger? No, but I want her removed from my home. Officers are on the way. Stay on the line with me. Patricia was backing toward the door, her composure cracking. You've lost your mind. Kevin will never forgive you for this. Never. I met her eyes and felt something settle in my chest. Something that felt like clarity. Then maybe Kevin and I have bigger problems than I thought. The 7 minutes it took for the police to arrive felt like 7 hours. Patricia paced my living room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors with sharp, angry precision. She kept pulling out her phone, typing furiously, then shoving it back into her purse. I stood near the kitchen doorway, the dispatcher still on the line, asking occasional questions to verify details. Patricia shot me looks that could have curdled milk, her mouth tight with rage she was barely containing. You're going to regret this, she hissed. When Kevin hears what you've done, when the whole family knows you called the police on me like some common criminal, you'll be the one packing bags. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make it worse, and somewhere beneath the adrenaline pumping through my veins, I felt a strange calm. For 5 years I'd measured every word around this woman, calculated every response, swallowed every retort. I'd bent myself into shapes that didn't fit just to avoid conflict, just to keep Kevin from having to choose between his wife and his mother. And where had it gotten me? Standing in my own home while she tried to claim it as hers. The police cruiser pulled up outside with no sirens, just the quiet authority of its presence. Through the front window I watched 2 officers step out. One was older, maybe late 40s, with gray at his temples and the kind of face that had seen enough domestic calls to know they were rarely simple. The other was younger, a woman with her hair pulled back tight, her hand resting casually near her belt as they approached the door. I met them on the porch, the dispatcher finally releasing me from the call. The older officer introduced himself as Officer James Durant, his partner as Officer Lisa Vasquez. I explained the situation as clearly as I could manage. My mother-in-law arrived unannounced with suitcases, used a key I didn't authorize her to have, and claims she's moving in permanently. I've asked her to leave. She's refused. Officer Durant nodded, his expression neutral. Is your husband home, ma'am? No, he's traveling for work. In Charlotte. And the property is in both your names? Yes. We bought it together 2 years ago. Both our names are on the deed and the mortgage. Officer Vasquez glanced past me into the house where Patricia had positioned herself in the center of the living room, arms crossed, chin lifted in defiance. That's your mother-in-law? Yes. Patricia Hartwell. They exchanged a look, the kind of silent communication that comes from working together long enough to read each other's thoughts. Then Officer Durant gestured toward the door. Let's go talk to her. Inside, Patricia had transformed. Gone was the angry woman who'd been pacing and threatening moments before. In her place stood a fragile, bewildered grandmother, her hand pressed to her chest as though her heart might give out from the stress. Officers, thank goodness you're here. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Officer Durant pulled out a small notepad. Ma'am, what's your name? Patricia Hartwell. I'm Kevin Brooks' mother. This is my son's home. Officer Vasquez glanced at me, then back to Patricia. The homeowner says you don't have permission to be here. Patricia's laugh was breathy, shocked. Permission? I'm family. My son gave me a key for emergencies. I sold my home in Lynchburg and Kevin and I agreed I would move in here. There's plenty of space. It's a family arrangement. Officer Durant's pen paused on his notepad. When did you and your son make this arrangement? Patricia waved her hand vaguely. We've been discussing it for weeks. He's been so worried about me living alone after his father passed. This was always the plan. I felt anger rising in my throat like bile. That's not true. My husband never mentioned any plan for her to move in. I found out she was coming when she showed up in my driveway this morning. Patricia turned to me with an expression of wounded innocence. Natalie dear, I know you and I have had our differences, but lying to the police is serious. Kevin specifically told me you'd agreed to this. The audacity of it stole my breath. She was standing in my living room, surrounded by evidence of her ambush, and rewriting reality as though I was the unreasonable one. as though I was the problem. Officer Vasquez stepped closer to Patricia. Ma'am, do you have any documentation showing you have a legal right to be in this home? A lease agreement? A property deed with your name on it? Patricia's confident mask flickered. I helped with the down payment when they bought the house. That gives me certain rights. Officer Durant looked up from his notepad. How much did you contribute? $5,000. As a wedding gift. And is your name on the property deed? Patricia hesitated. Well, no, but my attorney assured me that my financial contribution establishes partial ownership, especially given that Kevin is my son and I'm his next of kin. Officer Vasquez's expression remained carefully neutral, but I caught the slightest tightening around her eyes. Ma'am, a gift doesn't typically establish ownership unless there's a legal agreement in writing. Do you have any such agreement? The silence that followed was answer enough. Patricia's face was reddening, her composure cracking at the edges. I don't need a piece of paper to prove I have a right to be in my son's home. Officer Durant closed his notepad. Ma'am, here's the situation. Both the homeowners, Natalie Brooks and Kevin Brooks, need to give consent for you to stay here. Mrs. Brooks has explicitly stated she doesn't consent. Unless you can provide legal documentation proving your right to be here, you need to leave the property. Patricia's voice rose, sharp and indignant. This is absurd. I'm not some stranger off the street. I'm Kevin's mother. You can't just throw me out. Officer Vasquez's tone remained calm but firm. We're not throwing you out, ma'am. We're asking you to leave voluntarily. If you refuse, Mrs. Brooks has the right to press trespassing charges. The word trespassing hung in the air like a slap. Patricia stared at the officers, then at me, her expression cycling through disbelief, rage, and something that might have been genuine shock that her plan wasn't working. You wouldn't dare. But I would. And she could see it in my face. 5 years of biting my tongue, of accepting disrespect, of trying to earn approval that would never come, all of it had led to this moment. This line I was finally willing to defend. I looked at Officer Durant. I want her to leave. Now. Patricia grabbed her purse from the coffee table, her hands shaking. Fine. I'll leave. But when Kevin hears about this, when he knows you had his mother arrested, you're not being arrested, Officer Vasquez interrupted. You're being asked to leave. There's a difference. Patricia's eyes were wet now, tears of fury rather than sadness. She turned to me one last time. You've made a terrible mistake, Natalie. Terrible. Family doesn't treat family like this. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. You're right. They don't. Officer Durant gestured toward the suitcases still lined up in the entryway. Ma'am, you'll need to take your belongings with you. For a moment I thought Patricia might refuse. Might plant herself on my sofa and force them to physically remove her. But even she could see that battle was lost. She grabbed the handle of the nearest suitcase and dragged it toward the door, her movements jerky with suppressed rage. Officer Vasquez helped her carry the other two to the car, professional and detached. I watched from the porch as Patricia loaded her belongings into the trunk, slamming it hard enough to make the whole car shake. She turned back one last time, and the look she gave me was pure venom. This isn't over. Then she got into her car and drove away, tires squealing slightly as she pulled out of the driveway. Officer Durant handed me a small card with a case number written on it. If she comes back without your permission, call us immediately. You might also want to consider changing your locks given that she has a key. I stared at the card, the reality of what had just happened starting to sink in. Thank you. He nodded, his expression softening slightly. For what it's worth, ma'am, you did the right thing. Property rights exist for a reason. Even family members can't just move in without consent. After they left, the house felt unnaturally quiet. I stood in the living room where Patricia had stood 20 minutes earlier, and noticed the small signs of her brief occupation. A scuff mark on the floor from her suitcase wheel. Her perfume still hanging faintly in the air. That expensive floral scent she always wore. The coffee table slightly askew from where she'd set down her purse. My phone buzzed. Finally, Kevin was calling. I answered, my voice steady. Your mother just left. There was a pause, then his voice came through, tight with stress. Nat, what the hell happened? Mom is hysterical. She says you called the cops on her? She showed up here with 3 suitcases saying she was moving in permanently. Did you know about this? Another pause, longer this time. She mentioned she was thinking about staying with us for a while. I didn't think she meant today. For a while? Kevin, she said permanently. She had a key to our house that you apparently gave her without telling me. She claimed she had legal ownership because of that wedding money. Did you tell her she could move in? I could hear him breathing, could picture him pinching the bridge of his nose the way he did when he was stressed. I told her we'd talk about it. I didn't say yes. I didn't think she'd just show up. But you didn't say no either. And you didn't tell me she was even considering this. Nat, she's my mom. She sold her house. She doesn't have anywhere to go. The words hit me like a physical blow. After everything that had just happened, after I'd had to call the police to protect my own home, his first instinct was still to defend her. To make excuses. To imply that somehow I should have just accepted this invasion because she was family. She has plenty of places to go, I said quietly. She has your sister. She has the money from selling her house. She could rent an apartment. She could buy a condo. She has options, Kevin. What she doesn't have is the right to move into our home without asking me. I hear you, but calling the cops? That's extreme, Nat. Now the whole family is going to hear about this. Mom's already texted Bridget. This is going to blow up. It already blew up. The moment your mother walked into our house without permission, it blew up. I'm just the one who refused to pretend everything was fine. Silence on the other end. Then, quietly, I need to focus on this client meeting. We'll talk about this when I get home. When will that be? Friday. Maybe Saturday. 3 more days. 3 days of sitting in this house alone, knowing that Patricia was out there poisoning the family against me. Knowing that Kevin was more worried about the optics than the violation. 3 days to decide whether I was willing to stay married to a man who would give his mother a key to our home, and then act surprised when she used it. Fine, I said. We'll talk when you get home. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear or adrenaline. It was from the dawning realization that the problem wasn't just Patricia. It was Kevin. It had always been Kevin, and his inability to choose me over his mother's demands. Patricia was a storm, violent and destructive, but Kevin was the door he kept leaving open, letting that storm blow through our lives over and over again. I walked through the house room by room, seeing it differently now. The guest room where Patricia had planned to sleep, rearranging my exercise equipment and claiming the better light. The kitchen where she wanted to reorganize my spices. The living room where she'd stood with such confidence, so certain that her version of family meant ownership of everything her son touched. In my office, I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. The video call I'd abandoned was still there. The meeting ended abruptly when Patricia had arrived. I typed an apology email to my client, professional and brief, saying a personal emergency had required my immediate attention. Then I opened a new browser tab and searched for something I'd never thought I'd need. Locksmith services near me, emergency availability. A company called Secure Home Solutions had availability that afternoon. I booked them for 3 o'clock service for all exterior door locks. Then I did something else I'd never imagined doing. I searched for family law attorneys in Richmond, Virginia. The top result was Mitchell & Associates, downtown office, specializing in property disputes and family law. I clicked on their website and read through the bios of their attorneys. One name stood out. Lauren Mitchell, senior partner, with a photo showing a woman about my age with kind eyes and a professional smile. Her specialization included property rights and domestic disputes. At the bottom of her bio was a line that made my throat tight. Everyone deserves to feel safe in their own home. I called the office. The receptionist answered with practiced warmth, and I explained my situation as briefly as possible. My mother-in-law attempted to move into my home without permission. I had to call the police to have her removed. I need to understand my legal rights regarding the property and what protections I have going forward. The receptionist scheduled me for the next morning. 9:30, consultation with Lauren Mitchell. I hung up feeling something I hadn't felt since Patricia had pulled into my driveway that morning. A sense of forward motion. A sense that I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was planning. The locksmith arrived exactly at 3. A friendly man named Marcus who didn't ask questions when I explained I needed all the exterior locks changed immediately. He worked efficiently, replacing the front door lock, the back door, the garage entrance. Each new key gleamed silver and untouched, representing security I'd thought I had but clearly didn't. How many copies do you want? Marcus asked as he finished the last lock. Just 2. Both for me. He raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. Smart choice. You never know who's got copies of the old keys floating around. Exactly. After he left, I went through the house again, this time checking windows, making sure everything was locked. The sun was starting to set, painting the living room in shades of amber and shadow. My phone had been buzzing periodically all afternoon. Text messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Bridget, probably, or other members of Kevin's family who'd heard Patricia's version of events. I didn't read them. Didn't respond. Whatever narrative Patricia was spinning, I couldn't control it. All I could control was my own story, my own truth. That night, I made myself dinner in the kitchen Patricia had wanted to reorganize. Pasta with the basil from my garden, garlic bread, a glass of wine from the bottle Kevin and I had opened the weekend before. I ate at the kitchen table, looking out at the backyard where the last light was fading from the sky. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty anymore. Felt like mine again. Before bed, I did one more thing. I went to the guest room at the end of the hall, the one with the better light that Patricia had claimed for herself. I stood in the doorway, looking at the space I'd set up for visitors who actually respected boundaries. The bed with its blue quilt. The dresser I'd refinished myself. The reading chair by the window. This room wasn't hers. This house wasn't hers. And I just spent an entire day proving it. I closed the door and went to my own bedroom, sliding between sheets that smelled like lavender detergent and safety. My phone buzzed one more time. Another unknown number. Another message I wouldn't read. I turned it face down on the nightstand and closed my eyes. Tomorrow I'd meet with a lawyer. Tomorrow I'd start building protections around the life I'd worked so hard to create. Tomorrow I'd figure out what it meant to stay married to a man who'd given his mother a key to my home, and then acted like I was the problem for changing the locks. But tonight I was just going to sleep in my own house, behind locks that only I controlled, and call that a victory. The thing about drawing a line is that it forces everyone else to choose a side. I'd spent 5 years trying to avoid that choice, trying to be accommodating enough that Kevin would never have to pick between his wife and his mother. But Patricia had blown past every unspoken boundary, and now the line was drawn whether I wanted it or not. People were choosing. And I was about to find out exactly where my husband would land. Morning arrived with the kind of brutal clarity that comes after a sleepless night. I dozed in fragments, waking every hour to check the windows, listen for cars in the driveway, convince myself that Patricia wasn't coming back with reinforcements. By the time my alarm went off at 6:30, I'd already been awake for 20 minutes, staring at the ceiling and mentally rehearsing what I'd say to the lawyer. The shower helped. Hot water and steam and the ritual of washing my hair. Conditions that made everything feel slightly more manageable. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that felt like armor. Navy slacks, a cream blouse, the blazer I usually saved for important video calls. I needed to look like someone who had her life together, even if I felt like I was holding it together with scotch tape and spite. Downtown Richmond at 9 in the morning was all business and purpose. I parked in the garage beneath the Mitchell and Associates building and took the elevator to the 8th floor. My heels clicking against polished marble as I walked through glass doors into a reception area that smelled like leather and expensive coffee. The receptionist smiled warmly and offered me water while I waited. I accepted, grateful for something to do with my hands. Lauren Mitchell appeared exactly at 9:30, and she wasn't what I'd expected. Her website photo had shown a polished professional in a dark suit, but the woman who greeted me wore gray pants and a soft pink sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She shook my hand firmly and led me back to her office, which had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "Tell me everything," she said, settling into the chair across from me instead of behind her desk. "Start from the beginning." So I did. I told her about Patricia's arrival, the suitcases, the key I'd never authorized. I told her about the wedding money and Patricia's claim that it gave her ownership rights. I told her about calling the police and Kevin's reaction, and the sick feeling that had settled in my stomach when I realized my husband had known this was coming and hadn't warned me. Lauren listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me with an expression that was equal parts sympathy and steel. "First, let me be absolutely clear about something. Your mother-in-law has no legal claim to your property. A monetary gift, even one used toward a down payment, does not establish ownership unless there's a written agreement specifying equity share. Based on what you've told me, no such agreement exists. Relief washed over me so strongly I felt dizzy. So she was lying. She was either lying or genuinely misinformed by an attorney who doesn't understand property law. Either way, her claim has no merit. Lauren flipped to a fresh page on her legal pad. What concerns me? More is the key. You said your husband gave it to her without your knowledge? That's what she claimed. Kevin said it was for emergencies. Both owners of a property need to consent to providing access to third parties, especially family members who might claim residency rights. The fact that he gave her a key without discussing it with you is problematic, not just legally but maritally. I'd already changed the locks. Lauren's expression shifted to approval. Good. That was exactly the right move. Do you still have the old locks? The locksmith took them. Why? Because if your mother-in-law tries to use that key again and finds it doesn't work, she can't claim she had legitimate access. You've established a clear boundary. She paused, studying me. I need to ask you something difficult. Do you think your husband would give her another key? The question sat between us like a stone. I wanted to say no immediately, to defend Kevin and insist he'd never betray me like that again. But I'd thought he'd never give her a key in the first place, and I'd been wrong. I don't know, I admitted. I want to believe he wouldn't. But 3 days ago, I would have said he'd never give her one without telling me. And here we are. Lauren nodded. Then we need to take steps to protect you legally. I'm going to draft a cease and desist letter to your mother-in-law, making it clear that she has no legal right to your property, and that any future attempts to enter without explicit permission from both homeowners will be considered trespassing. We'll also send a formal notice that the locks have been changed, and she no longer has authorized access. What about Kevin? Can he override that? Lauren's expression turned serious. Technically, as a co-owner, he has the right to provide access to the property. However, if he does so in a way that creates a hostile living environment for you or violates your reasonable expectation of privacy and safety, that could be grounds for legal action. It could also be relevant in divorce proceedings if it comes to that. The word divorce hit me like cold water. I hadn't let myself think that far ahead, hadn't wanted to admit that this situation might be the beginning of the end rather than just another rough patch. But Lauren was looking at me with the kind of gentle directness that said she'd seen this pattern before and knew where it usually led. I'm not saying you should file for divorce, she continued. I'm saying you should understand your options. If this pattern of prioritizing his mother's demands over your marriage continues, you need to know what protections you have. Virginia is an equitable distribution state, which means marital property is divided fairly, not necessarily equally. The fact that you both contributed to the down payment and have been paying the mortgage jointly would be factored in. I don't want a divorce. My voice sounded small, uncertain. I just want my home back. I want to feel safe in my own space. Then we focus on that. Lauren pulled out a folder and began writing notes. Here's what I recommend. 1. We send the cease and desist immediately. 2. We document everything that happened yesterday, including the police report. 3. You have a serious conversation with your husband about boundaries, and make it clear that future violations will have legal consequences. And 4. You consider whether you're willing to stay in a marriage where you have to legally protect yourself from your spouse's family. That last point hung in the air. I stared out the window at the Richmond skyline, the buildings sharp against a cloudless blue sky. Somewhere out there, Patricia was probably on the phone with Bridget, spinning her version of events. Poor Patricia, thrown out of her son's home by his ungrateful wife. Poor Patricia, who just wanted to be close to family and was treated like a criminal. My phone buzzed in my purse. I ignored it. There's one more thing, Lauren said. If your mother-in-law continues to harass you through calls, texts, or social media, we can pursue a protective order. It's a more serious legal step, but it's available if needed. How much is all this going to cost? I asked, suddenly aware that I was sitting in a downtown law office discussing legal action against my husband's family. Lauren quoted an hourly rate that made my stomach clench, then added, for initial consultation and the cease and desist letter, I can offer you a flat fee. If this escalates, we'll discuss payment plans. But Natalie, here's what I want you to understand. The cost of protecting your peace is always less than the cost of losing it. I left her office an hour later with a folder full of documents and a timeline for next steps. The cease and desist would be drafted by end of day and sent to Patricia's last known address in Lynchburg. Lauren would coordinate with the police to get a copy of yesterday's incident report. And I had homework, a list of every interaction with Patricia over the past year that involved boundary violations, financial requests, or inappropriate behavior. Document everything Lauren had said. Dates, times, witnesses. If this ends up in court, we want a pattern established. The elevator ride down felt surreal. 24 hours ago, I'd been working from home on a normal Tuesday, worried about project deadlines and whether I needed to buy groceries. Now I was building a legal case against my mother-in-law and contemplating whether my marriage would survive the fallout. I sat in my car in the parking garage for a long moment before starting the engine. My phone showed 17 missed calls. 6 from Kevin, 4 from unknown numbers, 7 from a contact labeled Bridget, which I must have saved at some family gathering years ago and then forgotten about. There were text messages too, dozens of them, but I couldn't bring myself to read them yet. Instead, I called the one person I knew would understand. My best friend Rachel had moved to Richmond around the same time I did. And we bonded over being transplants in a city where everyone else seemed to have deep roots. She answered on the second ring. "Please tell me you're free for lunch," I said. "Always. What's wrong? You sound like you're about to cry or commit murder." "Maybe both. Can you meet me at that cafe on Broad Street? The one with the good sandwiches? 30 minutes. Rachel was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 iced coffees waiting. She took one look at my face and said, "Okay. What did Patricia do now?" I told her everything. The whole saga from Patricia's arrival to the police to the lawyer's office that morning. Rachel listened with increasing horror, her sandwich forgotten on the plate in front of her. She tried to move in. Just showed up and tried to move in. With 3 suitcases and a fake legal claim. Rachel sat back in her chair. "I know I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again. That woman is unhinged. And Kevin just let her have a key to your house? Apparently. For emergencies." "Emergencies like what? She needs to rearrange your spices in the middle of the night?" I laughed and it felt good. Like releasing pressure from a valve that had been sealed too tight. That's basically what she said she wanted to do. Make the kitchen more efficient. Rachel shook her head slowly. "Nat, I love you and I've tried really hard not to tell you how to handle your marriage. But you know this isn't normal, right? You know most people don't have to call the cops on their in-laws?" "I know. And you know that Kevin choosing not to warn you, not to stop her, not to back you up, that's the real problem here?" I stared at my coffee. The ice had already started to melt, making it watery and weak. "I know that too. So what are you going to do?" It was the question I'd been avoiding since yesterday. What was I going to do? Kevin was coming home Friday or Saturday. We'd have to talk. He'd probably want me to apologize to Patricia, to smooth things over, to find some compromise where everyone was happy. But I was done compromising. Done shrinking myself to fit into the shape his family demanded. Done pretending that Patricia's behavior was normal or acceptable or something I should just tolerate because that's what good wives do. "I'm going to tell him the truth," I said slowly. "That his mother doesn't get to live in our house. That I'm not apologizing for protecting my home. And that if he can't support me on this, then we have a bigger problem than where Patricia lives." Rachel reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Good. And if he doesn't get it? If he chooses her? Then I guess I'll know where I stand." We sat there for a while longer, Rachel telling me about her work drama and her dating disasters, normal problems that felt like a vacation compared to my situation. When we finally left, she hugged me tight and whispered, "You're stronger than you think. Don't forget that." I drove home through afternoon traffic, my phone still buzzing periodically with calls and messages I wasn't ready to face. The house looked exactly as I'd left it that morning, quiet and solid and mine. I used one of the new keys to unlock the front door, and the click of the unfamiliar lock felt like victory. Inside, I made myself tea and sat down at my desk to tackle Lauren's homework. Document everything. I opened a fresh document on my laptop and titled it Patricia Hartwell, Pattern of Behavior. Then I started writing. The memories came easier than I expected. The engagement party where she told me I wasn't from the right kind of family. The wedding where she'd worn cream and given a toast that erased me completely. The first Christmas when she'd given Kevin expensive gifts and handed me a clearance candle with the price tag still on it. The time she'd rearranged my kitchen while I was at work and then acted offended when I moved things back. The constant phone calls interrupting dinners and date nights. The comments about how we'd chosen to live so far away, as if 2 hours was crossing an ocean. I wrote for 3 hours straight, my fingers flying over the keyboard, pulling out instances I'd tried to forget or excuse or reframe as misunderstandings. Seeing them all together, laid out chronologically with dates and details, the pattern was undeniable. This wasn't a mother who struggled with boundaries. This was a woman who believed she had no boundaries, not when it came to her son. By the time I finished, the document was 12 pages long. 12 pages of evidence that I'd been accommodating a woman who saw me as an obstacle rather than a person. 12 pages of proof that yesterday's invasion wasn't an isolated incident, but the inevitable escalation of years of unchecked entitlement. I saved the document and emailed it to Lauren with the note. Here's the pattern you asked for. I think I've been in denial about how bad this has been. Her response came 20 minutes later. This is extremely helpful and honestly quite disturbing. We'll use this if needed. How are you holding up? I stared at her question. How was I holding up? I was exhausted and angry and scared and somehow also more clear-headed than I'd been in years. I was mourning the fantasy of a family that might eventually accept me while simultaneously feeling relief that I'd stopped chasing that impossible dream. I'm okay, I typed back. Taking it one day at a time. That night I made dinner from ingredients in my own kitchen, organized exactly how I wanted them. I ate on the back porch, watching the sun set over my garden where the tomatoes were ripening and the basil was thriving. My phone buzzed again. Kevin calling. I let it go to voicemail. He'd left 3 already, each one progressively more frustrated. Nat, we need to talk about this. Call me back. Seriously, you can't just ignore me. This is my family we're dealing with. Mom is devastated. Bridget won't stop calling. You've created a huge mess, and we need to figure out how to fix it. I deleted all 3 without responding. He wanted to fix it, which meant he wanted me to apologize and backtrack and let Patricia believe she'd won. But there was nothing to fix. There was only a boundary to maintain. Tomorrow was Thursday. Kevin would be home in less than 48 hours. I needed to decide what I was going to say, how I was going to stand firm when he walked through that door and tried to convince me that family meant surrender. I went inside and locked the back door with my new key. In the living room, I looked at the spot where Patricia had stood with her suitcases, so confident in her claim. The floor had been cleaned, the scuff marks scrubbed away, but I could still see her standing there in my mind. Could still hear her voice saying this works out perfectly for everyone. It had worked out perfectly. Just not the way she'd planned. I pulled out my phone one more time and opened Kevin's last voicemail. Mom is devastated. The words echoed in the quiet house. Patricia was devastated that her plan had failed. Devastated that for once someone had said no. Devastated that she'd encountered a boundary she couldn't bulldoze through. Good, I thought. Let her be devastated. Let her sit with the consequences of trying to take what wasn't hers. I went to bed early, exhausted from 2 nights of broken sleep and the emotional weight of the past 48 hours. But before I turned off the light, I did one more thing. I took a photo of my new house key, still shiny and unused, sitting on my nightstand. I didn't post it anywhere or send it to anyone. I just saved it to my phone as a reminder. This is what safety looks like. A lock only you control. A home that's finally truly yours. Friday came with the weight of inevitability. Kevin had texted that morning saying he'd wrapped up early and would be home by dinner. No questions about what I wanted. No acknowledgement of the voicemails I hadn't returned. Just a simple statement of fact, as if the past 4 days hadn't happened, as if he could walk back into our house and everything would reset to normal. I spent the day preparing, though not in the way he probably expected. I didn't clean obsessively or plan an elaborate meal or rehearse apologies. I had no intention of making. Instead, I printed out the 12-page document I'd sent to Lauren. I gathered the police incident report that had arrived in my email that morning. I laid out the receipt from the locksmith and a copy of our property deed with both our names clearly highlighted. Evidence. Not for a fight, but for a conversation that needed to happen whether Kevin was ready for it or not. At 5:30, I heard his car in the driveway. The engine cut off. A door slammed. Footsteps on the walkway. Then the sound of a key scraping against the lock, trying once, twice, unable to turn. A pause. Another attempt. Then knocking. I walked to the door slowly, taking my time. Through the frosted glass, I could see his silhouette, the familiar shape of the man I'd married 6 years ago. The man who'd promised to build a life with me. The man who'd handed his mother a key to that life without asking. I opened the door. Kevin stood there with his overnight bag slung over his shoulder, his face tight with confusion and irritation. His key was still in his hand. "The locks don't work," he said. "Did something break?" "I changed them." His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "You changed the locks?" Without telling me, I stepped back to let him in, and he walked past me into the living room, dropping his bag by the sofa. He turned to face me, and I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the stress of 4 days trying to manage his mother's crisis from 2 hours away. "Nat, what is going on?" Mom called me in tears. "Bridget has been blowing up my phone. I've spent the entire week putting out fires, and now I come home to find out you've locked me out of my own house?" "Our house," I corrected quietly. "And I didn't lock you out. I let you in. I just made sure your mother couldn't let herself in again." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when he was frustrated. "She wasn't breaking in. She had a key. A key I gave her for emergencies. A key you gave her without discussing it with me first. As it didn't seem like a big deal. She's my mother. What if something happened and we needed her to check on the house? Kevin, she showed up here with 3 suitcases and announced she was moving in. That's not checking on the house. That's claiming it." He looked away, jaw working. She was overwhelmed. The sale of her house fell through some inspection issues and she panicked. She didn't mean to just show up like that. She thought we talked about her staying here. The lie was so smooth it almost sounded believable. I stared at my husband, trying to find the man I'd fallen in love with underneath the exhausted, defensive person standing in front of me. "Did the sale really fall through? Or is that just what she told you?" He met my eyes and I saw the flicker of doubt. Why would she lie about that? Why would she forge documents to access my bank accounts? Why would she tell the police that you and I had agreed to let her move in when I'd never heard a word about it? Why would she claim she had legal ownership of our house based on a $5,000 wedding gift? His face paled. "What are you talking about? What documents?" I walked to the kitchen table where I'd laid out everything and picked up the folder Lauren had given me. I handed it to him. "Your mother tried to claim she had partial ownership of this house. She told the police that her financial contribution gave her rights. My attorney confirmed that's completely false. A gift doesn't establish equity unless there's a written agreement, which there isn't." Kevin opened the folder, scanning the legal documents inside. His hands were shaking slightly. "You hired an attorney?" "I had to. Your mother showed up in our home claiming she owned it. She had a key I didn't authorize. You weren't here to handle it, and when I called you, your first reaction was to defend her instead of asking if I was okay." He looked up from the papers, and for the first time since he'd arrived, I saw something other than defensiveness in his expression. I saw guilt. "I should have called you back. I was just so overwhelmed with her calling and Bridget calling, and everyone was saying you'd overreacted. I called the police because she refused to leave our property. That's not overreacting. That's enforcing a boundary. By having my mother escorted out by cops? Do you have any idea how humiliating that was for her?" The anger I'd been holding back for 4 days finally broke through. "Do you have any idea how humiliating it was for me? To have her walk into my home without permission? To have her stand in my living room and tell me she was taking over the guest room and reorganizing my kitchen? To realize that my husband had given her access to our home, and then didn't even warn me she might use it?" Kevin set the folder down on the coffee table and sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands. "I didn't think she'd actually do it. When she mentioned maybe staying with us for a while, I told her we'd need to discuss it. I thought that was enough. I didn't think I needed to explicitly tell her no. That's the problem." I kept my voice steady, but my hands were shaking now. "You've spent your entire life never explicitly telling her no. You've spent our entire marriage making me the bad guy for having boundaries she doesn't like. And now it's gotten to the point where she thinks she can move into our house without asking because she's never faced a real consequence for crossing a line. He looked up at me and I saw tears in his eyes. She's my mom, Nat. She's alone. Dad died 2 years ago. Bridget's family doesn't have room for her. What am I supposed to do, just abandon her? I sat down across from him, the coffee table between us like a barrier. No one's asking you to abandon her. I'm asking you to put your wife first. I'm asking you to recognize that your mother's comfort doesn't get to come at the expense of my safety and peace in my own home. He was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, "What do you want me to do?" I pulled out the 12-page document and set it in front of him. "I want you to read this. All of it. It's every boundary violation, every dismissal, every time your mother has treated me like an obstacle instead of your partner. I want you to really see the pattern. And then I want you to decide if you're willing to set real boundaries with her, or if you're going to keep choosing her feelings over our marriage." Kevin picked up the document, his eyes scanning the first page. I watched his face as he read, watched recognition and denial war with each other. He knew these stories. He'd been there for most of them. But he'd never had to see them all together, never had to confront the accumulated weight of his mother's behavior and his own complicity in enabling it. When he finally finished, he set the papers down carefully. "Some of this I didn't realize how bad it was. But Nat, she's not malicious. She just doesn't think before she acts. Intent doesn't erase impact. If she stepped on your foot accidentally, it would still hurt. And if she kept stepping on it every time you saw her, eventually you'd stop believing it was an accident." He rubbed his face, looking older than he had when he'd walked in. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to tell your mother that she cannot move into our house now or ever. I want you to support the cease and desist letter my attorney is sending her. I want you to stop making excuses for behavior you'd never accept from anyone else just because she's your mother. And I want you to go to counseling with me so we can figure out if this marriage can survive the damage that's already been done." The word damage hung between us. Kevin stared at me like I'd slapped him. "You think our marriage is damaged? I think we've been ignoring cracks in the foundation for 5 years, and your mother just drove a truck through the load-bearing wall." "Yes, Kevin. I think we're damaged. The question is whether you're willing to do the work to repair it." He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Then softly he said, "I don't want to lose you. Then stop choosing her over me." "It's not that simple." "It is exactly that simple." I leaned forward, needing him to hear this. "Every time she crosses a boundary and you make excuses, you're choosing her. Every time she insults me and you tell me not to take it personally, you're choosing her. Every time she creates a crisis and you drop everything to fix it without considering how it affects me, you're choosing her. I can't compete with your mother for your loyalty, Kevin. I shouldn't have to." Tears were running down his face now. What if I can't do it? What if I try to set boundaries and I just can't follow through? The question broke something in me because it was the first honest thing he'd said since walking through the door. "Then I guess you'll have to decide which relationship you're willing to sacrifice. Because I'm done being collateral damage in your fear of disappointing her." We sat in silence as the light faded outside. The house that had felt like a battlefield for 4 days now felt like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. I couldn't make this decision for Kevin. I couldn't force him to choose me. All I could do was be clear about what I needed and let him decide if he was capable of providing it. Finally, Kevin spoke. "I'll call her tomorrow. I'll tell her she can't live here. I'll tell her the cease and desist is happening and she needs to respect it." "And counseling?" He nodded slowly. "And counseling. I'll find someone next week." It wasn't everything I needed to hear, but it was a start. I handed him one of the new house keys I'd had made. "This is yours. It's the only copy besides mine. Don't give it to anyone else. Not for emergencies. Not for any reason. If you want someone to have access to our home, we discuss it first. Together. Both of us agreeing. That's the new rule." He took the key, turning it over in his palm like it was something foreign. "Okay." We ordered takeout that night because neither of us had the energy to cook. We ate mostly in silence, occasionally commenting on nothing important, avoiding the elephant that was still sitting heavy in the room. The elephant that said this might not be enough. That years of damage couldn't be undone with one conversation and a promise to try harder. Kevin called Patricia the next morning. I didn't listen in, but I could hear his voice through the bedroom door, rising and falling in waves of firmness and apology. The call lasted nearly an hour. When he emerged, he looked exhausted. She's staying with Bridget for now. She says I've betrayed her. She wants me to know that she'll never forgive either of us for this humiliation. I felt something loosen in my chest. She actually said that? That she'll never forgive us? He nodded, sinking onto the edge of the bed. She said a lot of things. Most of it was about how ungrateful I am and how you've poisoned me against her. But yeah, she ended with saying she's done with both of us. How do you feel about that? Kevin was quiet for a moment, then quietly relieved. Guilty. Sad. All of it at once. That sounds about right. Over the next few weeks, a strange kind of peace settled over our house. Kevin started therapy, both individual sessions and couples counseling with me. In our second session, the therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Ellen Reeves, asked Kevin to describe his childhood relationship with his mother. As he talked, laying out a pattern of emotional manipulation and guilt that had started long before I entered the picture, I watched him come to realizations he'd been avoiding his entire adult life. She trained me to believe that her happiness was my responsibility, he said during one session. If she was upset, it was my job to fix it. If she was disappointed, I'd failed as a son. I've been carrying that since I was a kid. Dr. Reeves nodded. And when you married Natalie, your mother saw her as competition for that role. Another person with needs and feelings that might conflict with hers. Kevin looked at me, and I saw understanding dawn in his eyes. I put you in an impossible position. You did, I agreed. But now we're trying to get out of it. Patricia sent a few more messages over the following months, always through Kevin. Attempts to guilt him into reconciliation. Complaints about Bridget's house and how cramped she felt. Pointed comments about how other sons treated their mothers with respect. Kevin responded to each one with the same message, clearly crafted in therapy. I love you, but Natalie and I need boundaries around our home and our marriage. When you're ready to respect those boundaries, we can talk. She never responded to those messages. The silence stretched into months. Lauren's cease and desist letter had its desired effect. Patricia stopped showing up unannounced. Stopped claiming rights to our property. The legal threat had made something clear that emotional appeals never could. There were consequences now for crossing lines. By spring, something had shifted in our marriage too. Kevin was learning to sit with his mother's disappointment instead of immediately trying to fix it. He was learning that boundaries weren't betrayal. And I was learning that speaking up didn't make me difficult or unreasonable. It made me someone who valued herself enough to demand respect. One Saturday morning in April, almost 8 months after Patricia had tried to move in, Kevin and I were working in the garden together. He was helping me plant new tomatoes while I divided the basil that had gotten too crowded in its pot. The sun was warm on our shoulders. Birds sang in the oak tree that shaded our backyard. Everything felt simple and good in a way it hadn't for years. Do you think we're going to be okay? Kevin asked suddenly, his hands deep in the soil. I looked at him, at the man who'd finally chosen me after years of splitting his loyalty. I think we're getting there. He nodded slowly. I'm sorry it took so long. Sorry it got so bad before I saw it. I know. I patted down soil around a seedling. But you're seeing it now. That's what matters. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, conditioned by months of Patricia's family members sending angry messages on her behalf. But something made me open it. The message was from Bridget. Just wanted you to know Mom moved to Florida. She bought a condo near some friends from her church. She's doing okay. I don't expect you to care, but I thought Kevin should know she's settled somewhere. I showed Kevin the message. He read it twice, his expression complicated. How does that make you feel? I asked. Like maybe she's going to be okay without me fixing everything. He looked up at me. Is that terrible? No. It's healthy. We never heard from Patricia directly again. She sent Christmas cards to Kevin's office, impersonal and brief. He responded with equally brief messages. The relationship had become what it probably should have been all along, distant and polite, with boundaries everyone respected because the alternative had proven too costly. Our house in Westwood Hills stopped feeling like a battleground and started feeling like home again. I worked from my office without jumping at every car that passed. Kevin traveled for work without me wondering what crisis would erupt in his absence. We had dinners on the back porch and talked about plans for renovating the kitchen someday, and whether we might want to start thinking about kids now that the foundation of our marriage felt solid again. One evening in late summer, almost exactly a year after Patricia's attempted invasion, I stood on our front porch watching the sunset behind the neighborhood trees. The porch swing creaked softly as Kevin joined me, 2 glasses of wine in his hands. "I was thinking," he said, handing me a glass. "We should have a party. Invite Rachel and some of our friends. Christen the house properly now that it actually feels like ours." I smiled. "I'd like that." We sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from knowing someone deeply and choosing them daily. The kind that only exists when both people in a relationship are willing to do the hard work of protecting it. My phone buzzed. A reminder about a project deadline on Monday. I silenced it and set it face down on the swing between us. "No emergencies tonight," Kevin said. "Just us." "Just us," I agreed. The evening faded into soft purple darkness. Fireflies began their slow dance across the lawn. Inside our house, every light was warm and welcoming. Every lock was secure. Every room was arranged exactly how we wanted it. It was imperfect and human and wholly ours. Sometimes protecting your peace means going to war. Sometimes it means calling the police on family. Sometimes it means hiring an attorney and changing your locks and drawing lines you never imagined you'd have to defend. But on the other side of that war, if you're willing to fight for it, is something worth having. A home that's actually yours. A marriage built on choice rather than obligation. A life where boundaries aren't betrayals but the foundation of every healthy relationship. I'd lost a lot in that year. The fantasy of a mother-in-law who might someday accept me. The comfortable fiction that avoiding conflict was the same as keeping peace. The version of myself who apologized for taking up space. But what I gained was worth infinitely more. Self-respect. A partner who finally understood that love means protection, not just tolerance. And a house that felt safe because I'd fought to make it so. Kevin's hand found mine on the swing. We sat there as darkness settled completely. 2 people who'd nearly lost each other and chosen instead to rebuild. It wasn't the marriage we'd started with. It was better, forged in honesty instead of hope, strengthened by boundaries instead of weakened by their absence. In the house across the street, lights flicked on. A family moved through their evening routine, visible in brief flashes through windows. They probably had their own battles, their own boundaries to defend, their own lines drawn in permanent marker. We all do eventually. The question is just whether we have the courage to hold them. I squeezed Kevin's hand. He squeezed back. And in that simple gesture was everything we'd learned. That love without boundaries isn't love at all. That family doesn't mean ownership. That the hardest conversations are often the most necessary. That sometimes you have to risk losing everything to save what truly matters. The porch swing creaked softly beneath us. In the distance, a dog barked. Someone's car pulled into a driveway. Normal sounds of an ordinary evening in an ordinary neighborhood where extraordinary battles had been fought and won in the quiet privacy of one small house. Our house. Finally, completely legally and emotionally ours. 3 years had passed since the day Patricia showed up with her suitcases, and the world had shifted in ways I never could have predicted. The house in Westwood Hills had become more than just a structure with walls and a roof. It had become the evidence of every hard conversation, every boundary defended, every choice to value peace over performance. Kevin and I had weathered storms I once thought would sink us, and somehow we'd come through stronger for it. The kitchen renovation we'd talked about that summer evening finally happened. We'd knocked out a wall, expanded the space, installed the cabinets I dreamed about since we first bought the place. My spices were organized exactly how I wanted them, not alphabetically like Patricia had insisted, but by frequency of use and proximity to the stove. It was a small thing, meaningless to anyone else, but every time I reached for the cumin or the paprika, I felt a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with cooking and everything to do with autonomy. Rachel had become more than my best friend. She'd become my witness, the person who'd seen me at my lowest and never once suggested I should just keep the peace for an easier life. She'd moved across town the previous year, bought a condo near the river, and we still met for lunch every Thursday without fail. Those lunches had become sacred, a space where we could be completely honest about the messy reality of building lives that didn't look like the ones we'd been told to want. On a crisp October afternoon, 3 years and 2 months after everything had changed, I was sitting in my home office finishing up a project proposal when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, a Florida area code I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, conditioned by years of avoiding unknown callers who might be Patricia's proxies. But something made me answer. The voice on the other end was professional, measured female. Is this Natalie Brooks? Yes, who's calling? My name is Sandra Winters. I'm a social worker with Palm Coast Elder Services in Florida. I'm calling about Patricia Hartwell. You're listed as her son's wife, and we've been trying to reach family members. My stomach clenched. I set down my pen, giving the call my full attention. Is she all right? There was a pause, the kind that carries weight. Mrs. Hartwell was admitted to Halifax Medical Center 2 days ago, following a fall in her home. She suffered a broken hip and some minor head trauma. She's stable now, but the hospital is concerned about her ability to live independently. I'm calling to discuss care options and family involvement. I should have felt something immediate. Concern maybe. Or vindication that Patricia's insistence on managing everything alone had led exactly where it always does. Instead, what I felt was the complicated tangle of emotions that comes from being asked to care for someone who spent years making it clear they didn't want your care. Have you spoken to Kevin? I asked. He's her son. He should be the primary contact. We've left 3 messages at the number we have on file, but we haven't received a response. Your number was listed as an alternate contact. I pulled up my calendar, checking the date. Kevin was in Seattle for a conference, probably in sessions with his phone on silent. He wouldn't see messages until evening. I can reach him and have him call you directly. What's the timeline we're looking at? Sandra explained that Patricia would need surgery for the hip, followed by extensive rehabilitation. Even with successful recovery, she likely wouldn't be able to return to independent living. They were looking at assisted living facilities or family care arrangements. Someone needed to make decisions about her medical treatment and her living situation, and they needed to make them soon. I'll have Kevin call you within the hour, I promised, taking down Sandra's direct number. After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone, processing. 3 years of minimal contact, 3 years of Patricia living her life in Florida while Kevin and I rebuilt our marriage, and now this. The crisis she'd probably been dreading, the loss of independence she'd fought so hard to maintain, had arrived whether she was ready or not. Called Kevin. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice warm and slightly distracted. Hey babe, I'm between sessions. Everything okay? I explained the situation as clearly as I could, giving him Sandra's number and the details about Patricia's fall. I listened as his voice shifted from casual to concern to that familiar undertone of guilt that still surfaced when his mother was involved, even after years of therapy. I need to fly down there, he said immediately. She's going to need someone to help with medical decisions. I know. When's your conference done? Tomorrow afternoon, but I can leave early. I'll see if I can get a flight to Florida tomorrow night. Do you want me to come with you? The question hung there. 3 years ago, I would have asked out of obligation, already dreading his answer. Now I asked because I genuinely didn't know if my presence would help or complicate an already difficult situation. Kevin was quiet for a moment. I don't think so. Not for this first trip. I need to assess what's happening and have some hard conversations with her about care. Having you there might make her more defensive. I understood what he wasn't saying. Patricia had never apologized for trying to move into our home. Had never acknowledged that her behavior had been invasive or entitled. The Christmas cards she sent were signed simply Patricia. No warm wishes, no questions about our lives. The relationship had stabilized at cold distance, and dragging me into her medical crisis would only reignite old resentments when she was already vulnerable. I said. But Kevin, you need to be clear about boundaries even now. If she tries to manipulate you into bringing her back here, into having her live with us while she recovers, you need to hold the line. I know. His voice was steady. I'm not doing that again. Whatever solution we find, it's not going to involve her moving into our home. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my office, looking out at the garden that had become my meditation space. The tomatoes had been harvested for the season. The basil had started to die back with the cooler weather. Everything in its natural cycle of growth and dormancy and renewal. Kevin flew to Palm Coast the next evening. He called me from the airport sounding exhausted. I'm about to board. I'll call you when I get to the hotel. Be gentle with yourself, I told him. This isn't easy. I know. Love you. Love you too. The next few days were a study in waiting. Kevin called each evening with updates. The surgery had gone well. Patricia was lucid but angry about her circumstances. The doctors were recommending a skilled nursing facility for at least 6 weeks of intensive rehabilitation. Patricia was insisting she'd be fine to go home with some minor assistance. The social workers were making it clear that wasn't a realistic option. She asked about you, Kevin said on the third night. He sounded surprised. What did she say? She wanted to know if you were here. When I said no, she just nodded. Then she asked if you were still angry at her. I absorbed that. After 3 years of silence, Patricia was wondering if I was still angry. As if the issue had been my anger rather than her violation of boundaries. As if time alone could heal what had never been properly addressed. What did you tell her? I asked. I told her you weren't angry. That we'd moved on. But that we have boundaries now that we didn't have before, and those aren't changing. How did she take that? Kevin sighed. She said she never understood why something so small had to become such a big deal. There it was. The fundamental disconnect that had always existed between us. What Patricia saw as small, I had experienced as catastrophic. The inability to recognize that gap meant we'd probably never fully reconcile, and I was learning to be okay with that. By the end of the week, Kevin had found a solution. There was an assisted living facility called Serene Palms about 15 minutes from Patricia's condo. It was nice, well-staffed, with rehabilitation services and different levels of care depending on residents' needs. Patricia could move there after her hospital stay, do her rehabilitation, and if she recovered well enough, potentially move to an independent living unit in the same complex. She's not happy about it, Kevin told me. But she's accepting it. Bridget's going to help with the financial arrangements and the move from her condo. Are you okay? I asked because he sounded drained in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. Think so. It's just strange. Seeing her like this, vulnerable and scared. And remembering how she used to seem so powerful and in control. Like she could command reality to bend to what she wanted. People age. They lose power. It doesn't mean you failed her by not giving her everything she demanded. I know. Thanks for reminding me. When Kevin came home 5 days later, he looked like he'd aged a year and a week. We sat on the back porch that evening, the October air cool enough to need sweaters, and he told me about the difficult conversations he'd had with Patricia. About her fear of being alone. About her regret over the distance with Bridget's family. About her confusion over why her sons and daughters-in-law couldn't just understand that she only wanted to be close to the people she loved. He didn't tell me she'd apologized because she hadn't. But he told me she'd cried. And that was something he'd almost never seen. It humanized her in a way that years of her controlling behavior never had. I don't think she'll ever fully understand what she did wrong, Kevin said quietly. I don't think she's capable of seeing how her behavior affected other people. Maybe not. I pulled my sweater tighter. But that doesn't mean you have to keep trying to make her understand. Some people will never give you the closure you want. You just have to create it for yourself. He nodded slowly. In therapy, Dr. Reeves has been talking about acceptance versus approval. I'm working on accepting my mother as she is without needing her to approve of the boundaries I've set. That's good work. We sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled. Inside the house, lights glowed warm through the windows. Our house still standing, still solid, still ours. Kevin reached for my hand. Thank you for not pushing to come with me. For trusting me to handle it. I squeezed his fingers. You've earned that trust. Over the following months, Kevin settled into a routine of weekly phone calls with Patricia and quarterly visits to Florida. Bridget had stepped up more than anyone expected, visiting Patricia twice a month and handling most of the day-to-day coordination with Serene Palms. The crisis had shifted something in their family dynamic. With Patricia no longer able to play the martyr card of living alone and managing everything herself, she'd been forced to accept help on terms she didn't get to dictate. By the following spring, Patricia had recovered enough to move to an independent living unit within the Serene Palms complex. She had her own small apartment, access to dining services and activities, and the security of knowing medical help was available if she needed it. Kevin showed me pictures from his latest visit, Patricia sitting in her new living room surrounded by furniture from her old condo, looking smaller and older but stable. She asked me to thank you, Kevin said, showing me the photos. I looked up from my laptop, surprised. Thank me for what? For changing the locks. She said it was the wake-up call she needed to realize she couldn't keep living the way she had been. The irony was stunning. The action Patricia had once called unforgivable had become, in her revised history, a necessary intervention. I didn't know whether to laugh or feel vindicated or just accept it as Patricia's way of making peace without actually apologizing. You're welcome, I said simply, because what else was there to say? That summer, Kevin and I hosted the party we talked about years earlier. We invited Rachel and her new partner, some of Kevin's colleagues from work, neighbors we'd become friendly with, and a few of my clients who'd become friends over the years. We set up tables in the backyard, strung lights through the trees, and filled coolers with drinks and ice. As the evening wore on and laughter filled our garden, I stood at the edge of the patio watching. Rachel was telling an animated story that had everyone cracking up. Kevin was grilling burgers with the same focused intensity he brought to everything. The tomatoes in my garden were ripening again. Another season of growth. Rachel caught my eye and walked over, 2 glasses of wine in her hands. She handed me one and clinked hers against it. To you, she said quietly. To every hard choice that led to this. I looked around at the home we'd filled with people who respected us, who celebrated our boundaries instead of resenting them, who understood that sometimes love means defending your peace, even when it costs you relationships you thought you couldn't lose. To hard choices, I agreed. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and Kevin and I were cleaning up the last of the dishes, he paused with a dish towel in his hands and just looked at me. What? I asked, smiling. I was just thinking about where we were 3 years ago. How close we came to losing this. I know. I'm glad we fought for it. For us. Me too. We finished the dishes in easy silence, the kind that comes from knowing someone's rhythms and trusting their presence. When we finally went to bed, the house was clean and quiet and exactly as it should be. I lay in the darkness listening to Kevin's breathing even out into sleep, and I thought about Patricia in her apartment in Florida, finally safe in a way she'd never been when she was fighting so hard to control everything. I thought about Bridget, who'd found a way to care for her mother without sacrificing her own family's boundaries. I thought about Kevin, who'd learned that loving someone doesn't mean giving them everything they demand. And I thought about myself, about the woman who'd stood in this very room 3 years ago and dialed 911 with shaking hands. That woman had been terrified she was making a mistake. Terrified she was destroying her marriage. Terrified that protecting herself meant she was selfish or cruel or everything Patricia had always implied she was. But that woman had been wrong about what she was. She'd been brave. She'd been clear-sighted. She'd been someone who understood that some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed without consequences. The next morning I woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows, and the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. Kevin had gotten up early, something he only did on weekends when he was feeling particularly content. I found him on the back porch with 2 mugs, reading the news on his tablet. Morning, he said, handing me a cup. Beautiful day. It was. Clear blue sky, temperature perfect, birds singing in the oak tree. A Saturday morning with nothing pressing to do and nowhere we had to be. The kind of simple pleasure that's only possible when your foundation is solid. I thought we could drive out to that antique market in Charlottesville, Kevin suggested. You've been wanting new stuff for the guest room. The guest room. The room Patricia had tried to claim. The room that was now just a room, functional and neutral and available for people we actually invited to stay. That sounds perfect, I said. We spent the day wandering through stalls of vintage furniture and art, picking out a new quilt and some prints for the walls. On the drive home, Kevin's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and I saw Patricia's name. He answered on speaker. Hi Mom, how are you? Her voice came through, tinny but clear. I'm fine, dear. I just wanted to let you know I've joined a book club here at Serene Palms. We're reading that mystery you recommended. Kevin's face lit up. That's great, Mom. You'll love the twist in the middle. They talked for a few more minutes about the book, about her upcoming doctor's appointment, about Bridget's youngest starting college. Normal conversation between a mother and son, bounded by distance and schedule, and the understanding that this was the relationship they had now. When they hung up, Kevin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I think she's actually happy there. I think you might be right. It was a strange ending to a story that had begun with such conflict. Not reconciliation exactly, but resolution. Everyone in their appropriate places. With boundaries everyone understood and mostly respected. Patricia had her independence within the structure of assisted living. Kevin had his relationship with his mother without it consuming his marriage. And I had my home, truly mine in every sense that mattered. That night, I sat at my desk in the office that overlooked the street where Patricia had once pulled up with such confidence, and I opened a new document. I'd been thinking about writing down what had happened. Not for publication or even for sharing, but for myself. A record of how sometimes the hardest thing you ever do is also the most necessary. I titled it simply The Day I Changed the Locks, and I began to write. The words came easily, 3 years of perspective making the story clearer than it had been in the moment. I wrote about the fear and the anger and the guilt. I wrote about the conversations with Lauren, and the police report, and the moment Kevin finally understood what his mother's behavior had cost us. I wrote about therapy and boundaries and the slow work of rebuilding trust. But mostly I wrote about the unexpected gift of crisis. How sometimes it takes someone pushing you to your absolute limit to discover where your limits actually are. How sometimes the worst thing that happens becomes the catalyst for the best changes you ever make. When I finished hours later, the document was 15 pages long. I saved it to a folder labeled personal and closed the laptop. Kevin had already gone to bed. The house was quiet except for the usual settling sounds, the soft creaks and whispers of a structure that had weathered storms and held firm. I walked through the rooms one last time, a habit I developed years ago. Kitchen clean, lights off. Living room tidy, windows locked. Guest room peaceful and unoccupied. Master bedroom where Kevin slept, one arm flung out across my side of the bed. At the front door I checked the lock. The new lock, 3 years old now but still representing everything I'd fought to protect. I ran my fingers over the smooth metal, remembering the day Marcus the locksmith had installed it, remembering the first time I'd used the key that only I and Kevin possessed. This small action, changing a lock, had felt both enormous and insufficient in the moment. But it had been the beginning of everything. The first domino in a chain of choices that led to who I was now. A woman who could say no without drowning in guilt. A wife in a marriage built on mutual respect instead of one-sided accommodation. A person who understood that protecting your peace isn't selfish, it's survival. I turned off the porch light and headed to bed. Tomorrow would bring its own small challenges and joys. A work deadline. Maybe brunch with Rachel. The ordinary rhythm of a life that had been extraordinary only in how hard I'd fought to make it mine. Kevin stirred as I slid under the covers. You okay? He mumbled, half asleep. Perfect, I said, and meant it. 3 years ago, Patricia had stood in my living room with her suitcases and her entitlement and her absolute certainty that she deserved access to everything her son owned. 3 years ago, I called the police with shaking hands and wondered if I was destroying my family. But families that require your destruction to hold together aren't worth keeping intact. And homes that don't feel safe aren't worth living in. And marriages that demand you sacrifice your dignity for peace aren't actually peaceful at all. I'd learned those lessons the hard way. Through conflict and consequences and the slow rebuilding of something stronger than what had broken. And now, lying in the darkness of my own bedroom in my own house with my own husband who'd finally learned to choose me, I could say with absolute certainty that every hard moment had been worth it. The lock on my door was just metal and mechanics. But what it represented was everything. Autonomy. Safety. The right to decide who enters your space and your life. The power to say no and have it mean something. Patricia was in Florida, probably asleep in her apartment, living a life that had been forced into smaller parameters than she'd wanted. Kevin was beside me, breathing steadily, having learned that loving his mother didn't require sacrificing his wife. And I was here in the house I'd defended, in the life I'd built, finally at peace. Outside, the neighborhood slept. Inside, every room held evidence of the choices that mattered. The kitchen I'd organized my way. The office where I worked without fear of interruption. The garden I planted and tended and harvested season after season. And at the front door, the lock that had started everything. The small but significant barrier between chaos and calm, between invasion and sanctuary, between what others demanded and what I was willing to give. I closed my eyes and let sleep take me, knowing that tomorrow morning I'd wake up in the same place, still secure, still mine, still standing. Some battles are worth fighting. Some lines are worth defending. Some locks are worth changing. And some stories, no matter how they begin, can still end in peace. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late November, 5 years after Patricia had tried to move into our home. I was working on a presentation for a client meeting when my phone buzzed with Kevin's name on the screen. He rarely called during work hours anymore, having learned the importance of boundaries in all directions, so I answered immediately. His voice was tight, controlled in that way that meant he was holding back emotion. Bridget just called. Mom had a stroke last night. She's in the ICU at Halifax. I stopped typing mid-sentence, my hands hovering over the keyboard. How bad is it? They're not sure yet. She was unresponsive when the staff found her this morning. They think it happened sometime during the night. Bridget's already on a flight down there. Do you need to go? There was a pause, and I could hear him breathing through the complexity of the question. I don't know. Bridget said she'd call me after she talks to the doctors. But Nat, if this is it, if she's really dying, I need to be there. I know you do. My voice was steady, surprising myself with how calm I felt. You should book a flight. Be ready to leave if you need to. What about you? The question carried weight we both understood. 5 years had created distance and healing, but they hadn't erased history. Patricia and I had never reconciled in any meaningful way. Our interactions had been limited to brief acknowledgments during Kevin's video calls from her apartment, awkward pleasantries that satisfied the bare minimum of civility. The idea of me standing at her deathbed felt both absurd and somehow necessary. Let me know what Bridget says about her condition. Then we'll decide together. Kevin booked a flight for the following morning just in case. We spent that evening in quiet preparation, him packing a bag while I handled the logistics of his work schedule, and made sure everything at home would run smoothly in his absence. The house felt heavy with anticipation, like we were waiting for a storm we could see building on the horizon. Bridget called at 9 that night. Kevin put her on speaker, and her voice filled our bedroom, exhausted and strained. The doctors say it was a major stroke. She has significant brain damage. They don't think she's going to wake up. Kevin sank onto the edge of the bed. Can she hear us? If I talk to her, will she know? They don't know. Maybe. She's on life support, Kevin. We need to talk about what she would have wanted. The conversation that followed was painful in its practicality. Patricia had no living will, no advance directives, nothing in writing about her wishes. Bridget and Kevin had to piece together what they thought she would have wanted based on offhand comments over the years, and their understanding of who she'd been. It was the kind of impossible decision no child should have to make, and I watched Kevin's face as he tried to navigate it with Bridget over the phone. Eventually they agreed that Kevin would fly down the next day. They'd give it 48 hours to see if Patricia showed any signs of improvement. If not, they'd talk to the doctors about removing life support. The words hung in the air like lead weights, final and terrible and necessary. After they hung up, Kevin sat motionless for a long time. I sat beside him, my hand on his back, feeling the tension in his shoulders. I don't know how to do this, he said quietly. I spent so many years being angry at her, setting boundaries, protecting us from her. And now she's dying and I just feel sad. You can be both. Angry at how she treated you and sad that she's dying. Those things don't cancel each other out. He turned to look at me, his eyes wet. Do you want to come with me? I know it's a lot to ask. I know you have every reason to say no. I thought about it. Really thought about it. 5 years ago, the answer would have been an automatic no, driven by self-protection and unhealed wounds. But time and therapy and the security of knowing Kevin would choose me over his mother's demands had changed something. I could go to Florida without it meaning I was surrendering. I could be present for Kevin without it erasing the boundaries we'd fought so hard to establish. I'll come, I said. Not for her. For you. The relief on his face was profound. Thank you. We flew out the next afternoon, landing in Jacksonville and driving the rental car to Palm Coast in heavy silence. The hospital was modern and sprawling, all glass and steel that seemed too pristine for the messy reality of death. Bridget met us in the ICU waiting room, looking 10 years older than when I'd last seen her. She hugged Kevin hard, then turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Thank you for coming, she said simply. We followed her back to Patricia's room. I'd steeled myself for this moment, prepared for the shock of seeing my mother-in-law diminished and dying. But nothing really prepares you for the reality of someone hooked up to machines, their chest rising and falling with mechanical precision, their face slack and absent of the personality that had animated it. Kevin moved to her bedside immediately, taking her hand. The hand that had pointed at me in accusation. The hand that had gripped suitcase handles with such determination. Now it was just flesh and bone, cool to the touch, unresponsive. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. "It's Kevin. I'm here." No response. Just the steady beep of monitors and the whoosh of the ventilator. Bridget stood on the other side of the bed, her own hand resting on Patricia's arm. I stayed back near the door, feeling like an intruder in this moment of family grief. The neurologist came in 20 minutes later, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes and the matter-of-fact demeanor of someone who delivered bad news regularly. She reviewed Patricia's scans with Kevin and Bridget, showing them the areas of significant damage. The prognosis was clear even to my untrained eye. The stroke had been catastrophic. Even if Patricia survived, she would never be herself again. "We can keep her comfortable," the doctor said. "But you need to understand that she's not coming back from this. The question is whether you want to prolong the inevitable or let her go peacefully." Kevin looked at Bridget. Bridget looked at Kevin. Neither of them wanted to be the one to say it. Finally Kevin spoke. "How long do we have to decide?" "There's no rush. Take the time you need. Talk to family." The doctor paused, then added gently, "But in my experience, waiting rarely makes the decision easier. Just prolongs the pain." After she left, Kevin and Bridget stood in silence for a long time. Then Bridget said she would hate this. Being helpless. Being kept alive by machines. Kevin nodded. "I know." They decided to wait one more day, to give themselves time to process and to let other family members say goodbye if they wanted to. Bridget called her kids, now grown and scattered across different states. Kevin called a few of Patricia's friends from Serene Palms. Word spread quickly through the small community she'd built in Florida, and by evening there was a steady stream of visitors. Women from her book club, a neighbor from her building, people who'd known the version of Patricia that existed after she'd left Virginia, the one who'd been forced into humility by age and circumstance. I watched these people cry over her bedside, sharing stories about her sharp wit and her opinions about everything from politics to the best way to brew coffee. They painted a picture of someone I barely recognized, someone who could be generous and funny and engaged with the world in ways I'd never seen. It made me wonder if the Patricia who tried to take over my home had been the worst version of herself, driven by fear of irrelevance and the desperate need to maintain control as her world got smaller. That night, Kevin and I got a hotel room near the hospital. We ordered room service. Neither of us really ate and sat on the balcony overlooking a parking lot, the Florida humidity thick even in November. Those people today, Kevin said, they loved her. They saw something in her that we never got to see. Maybe she was different with them. Maybe not having power over them made it easier for her to just be herself. Do you think she was happy here? After everything? I considered it. Based on what we'd heard, what we'd seen in her apartment on Kevin's previous visits, what the staff at Serene Palms had said about her participation in activities and social life, I thought maybe she had been. Not the happiness she'd imagined for herself, living with family and being essential to their daily lives, but a quieter kind of contentment, the kind that comes from accepting what is, instead of fighting for what you think should be. I think she made peace with it, I said. That's as close to happy as some people get. Kevin was quiet for a while. Then I'm glad you came. I couldn't do this alone. You're not alone. You have Bridget. You'd be okay. But I'm better with you here. The next day, after consulting with the doctors one more time and confirming there was no hope of meaningful recovery, Kevin and Bridget made the decision. They would remove life support that afternoon. The family gathered, such as it was. Bridget's oldest daughter flew in that morning. A few of the church ladies from Patricia's book club came to pay their respects. And Kevin and I stood at her bedside as the doctor explained the process. It would be peaceful, she assured us. They'd give Patricia medication to keep her comfortable. Once the ventilator was removed, it could take minutes or hours, but she wouldn't suffer. Kevin held his mother's hand as they turned off the machines. The sudden absence of beeping and whooshing made the room feel unnaturally quiet. Patricia's chest continued to rise and fall on its own, but shallower now, irregular. Bridget was crying silently on the other side of the bed. Kevin's face was stone, but I could see his jaw working with the effort of holding himself together. "I love you, Mom," he said quietly. "I'm sorry it got so hard between us. I'm sorry we couldn't figure out how to be family without hurting each other." Patricia's breathing got slower, shallower. The spaces between breaths grew longer. No dramatic last moment. No final words or gestures. Just the gradual quieting of a life that had been loud and demanding and complicated. When it was over, the doctor checked for a pulse and noted the time. 2:47 p.m. Bridget dissolved into sobs. Kevin stood frozen, still holding his mother's now still hand. I put my hand on his shoulder, the only comfort I could offer. We stayed in Florida for 3 more days, helping Bridget handle the logistics of death. Notifying Serene Palms. Arranging for a funeral home. Going through Patricia's apartment to find important documents and family photos. The apartment was small but carefully maintained, everything organized with the precision Patricia had always insisted on. Looking through her things felt invasive and necessary all at once. In a drawer in her bedroom, Bridget found a photo album I'd never seen. Pictures of Kevin and Bridget as children, school photos and birthday parties and family vacations. Patricia had been young in these photos, pretty and smiling, holding her babies with an expression of fierce love. I stood looking at one particular photo, Patricia with toddler Kevin on her hip, and tried to reconcile this loving young mother with the woman who'd tried to commandeer my home. "She wasn't always like she became," Bridget said quietly, appearing beside me. "When Dad was alive, when we were young, she was different. Warmer." "What changed?" Bridget shrugged. "Age. Fear. Dad dying. I don't know. Maybe she was always controlling and we just didn't see it when we were kids because parents are supposed to be in charge." The funeral was small, held at a local chapel that Patricia's church group had recommended. Maybe 30 people attended, mostly her Florida friends and a handful of distant relatives. Kevin gave a eulogy that was honest and kind, acknowledging both who his mother had been and the difficulties in their relationship. He talked about her strength and her stubbornness, her sharp mind and her inability to compromise. He didn't sugarcoat their estrangement, but he didn't make it the whole story either. Afterward, at the small reception Bridget had organized, several of Patricia's friends approached me. They'd heard stories, they said carefully. They knew things had been complicated between Patricia and her son's families. But they wanted me to know that Patricia had spoken kindly of me in recent years. Had said that I'd helped Kevin become more independent. Had even once admitted that she'd handled the whole situation badly. I didn't know if I believed them, or if they were just trying to create a neat narrative for a messy story. But I thanked them anyway, because their kindness was real even if Patricia's deathbed redemption might not have been. Kevin and I flew home the day after the funeral. As the plane lifted off from Jacksonville, I watched Florida disappear beneath us, and felt the strange lightness that comes after something heavy has finally ended. Patricia was gone. The woman who'd consumed so much energy and emotion in therapy sessions had breathed her last breath. And what I felt wasn't triumph or relief or even particularly sadness. Just a kind of quiet closure. The house in Westwood Hills welcomed us back with its familiar silence. Kevin dropped his bag by the door and stood in the living room, looking around like he was seeing it for the first time. "She never got to come back here," he said. "After that first day when you called the police, she never set foot in this house again." "No, she didn't." "Do you ever regret it? Handling it that way?" I thought about my answer carefully because it mattered and because Kevin deserved honesty. "No. I don't regret defending our home. I don't regret the boundaries we set. But I am sad that it had to be that way. I'm sad we couldn't find a path where everyone got what they needed." Kevin nodded slowly. "Me too." Over the following weeks, we settled back into our routines. Kevin processed his grief in therapy, working through the complicated emotions of losing a parent you'd been estranged from. I supported him through the waves of sadness and guilt and relief and confusion that came in unpredictable cycles. Dr. Reeves helped him understand that all of it was normal, that grief for complicated relationships is itself complicated. 3 months after Patricia's death, an envelope arrived from Bridget. Inside was a letter and a small velvet box. I opened the letter first. "Natalie," it read in Bridget's careful handwriting. "When we were going through Mom's things, I found this in her jewelry box with a note that said for Kevin's wife. I don't know when she wrote it or what she meant by it, but I thought you should have it. I opened the velvet box. Inside was a simple gold bracelet, delicate and elegant, clearly vintage. I lifted it out and saw an inscription on the inside. To Eleanor on our wedding day, with all my love, Robert. Patricia's wedding bracelet. The one her husband had given her. The one that had probably meant more to her than almost anything else she owned. And she'd left it for me. I showed Kevin that evening. He stared at the bracelet for a long time, turning it over in his hands. She never wore this after Dad died, he said quietly. She kept it in that velvet box and took it out sometimes to look at it, but she said it made her too sad to wear. Why would she leave it to me? Kevin shook his head. I don't know. Maybe it was her way of saying she understood what marriage means. What commitment costs. Maybe it was an apology she couldn't say out loud. I took the bracelet and fastened it around my wrist. It fit perfectly, the gold warm against my skin. I didn't know if Patricia had meant it as an apology or an acknowledgement or just a practical decision about who should inherit her jewelry. But I chose to accept it as a peace offering from beyond the grave. A final gesture from a woman who'd never been good at admitting she was wrong but who'd maybe, in her last months, begun to understand some things differently. Spring came again to Richmond, the fifth spring since the day I'd changed the locks. The garden bloomed with the plants I'd nurtured through seasons of growth and dormancy. The house stood solid and welcoming, full of memories both difficult and sweet. Kevin and I had weathered the storm of Patricia's dying and found ourselves still standing, still choosing each other, still building the life we wanted. One Saturday morning, I was working in the garden when Rachel came over for coffee. She'd gotten engaged the month before, and was full of excited plans for a small wedding in the fall. As we sat on the back porch, she noticed the bracelet on my wrist. That's pretty. Is it new? I explained its history, Patricia's unexpected bequest, the inscription from a husband long dead. Rachel listened with the attention she always gave to stories about my relationship with Kevin's family. So she did apologize in her way, Rachel said when I finished. Maybe. Or maybe she just didn't want the bracelet to go to waste. Rachel smiled. You don't actually believe that? No, I admitted. I think she was trying to tell me something she couldn't say while she was alive. That she understood. That it mattered. That marriage is hard and boundaries are necessary, and sometimes the people who love us most are the ones we hurt the worst. That's very generous of you. I'm trying to be. She's dead. Being angry at her now doesn't protect me from anything. We sat in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that only exists between people who've known each other through transformations. Rachel had seen me at my most broken and my most fierce. She'd witnessed the entire journey from that first phone call about Patricia showing up with suitcases to this moment 5 years later, wearing a dead woman's wedding bracelet and feeling something approaching forgiveness. Kevin appeared in the doorway with fresh coffee. He refilled our mugs and settled into the chair beside me, his hand automatically finding mine. The gesture was so natural now, so unremarkable, that I sometimes forgot how hard we'd fought to get to this place of easy affection and trust. What are we talking about? He asked. How far we've come, I said simply. He smiled. Long way from where we started. Rachel raised her mug. To growth. Even when it's painful. We clinked our cups together. 3 people who'd learned in different ways that sometimes you have to lose things to find yourself. Rachel had lost relationships that didn't value her. Kevin had lost his mother twice, once to boundaries and once to death. And I had lost the version of myself who believed that keeping peace meant accepting disrespect. What we'd gained was harder to quantify but impossible to deny. Authenticity. Security. The knowledge that we could survive hard things and come out stronger. The understanding that love without boundaries isn't love at all. Just a transaction where someone always pays too much. Later that afternoon, after Rachel had left and Kevin had gone to run errands, I stood in the guest room at the end of the hall. The room Patricia had tried to claim. The room that had been at the center of the crisis that changed everything. It looked nothing like it had 5 years ago. We'd repainted, bought new furniture, hung different art. But it was still just a guest room, peaceful and neutral and available for people we chose to invite into our space. I thought about Patricia lying in that hospital bed, her hand cool and unresponsive in Kevin's grip. I thought about the young mother in those photographs, fierce and loving and full of certainty about her place in the world. I thought about the elderly woman in Florida who joined a book club and made friends and maybe, just maybe, found some measure of peace. None of it erased what she'd done. The violation of showing up with suitcases and claiming ownership of my home. The years of boundary crossing and manipulation. The damage to my marriage that had required so much work to repair. But it complicated the story in a way that felt more honest than simple villainy. People are complex. Families are messy. And sometimes the hardest thing is holding space for both the harm someone caused and the humanity they still possessed. I walked back downstairs to my office and opened the document I'd written years ago, the one titled The Day I Changed the Locks. I added a new section at the end, about Patricia's death and the bracelet, and the unexpected gift of complicated closure. Then I saved it and closed the laptop. Some stories don't have neat endings. Some relationships don't get resolution. Some wounds take years to heal and even then leave scars that ache in certain weather. But we survive them. We learn from them. We become people who know how to defend their peace because we've learned the cost of losing it. The bracelet caught the afternoon light, gold gleaming against my wrist. A reminder of a woman who'd loved imperfectly and died unreconciled, but who'd left behind this one gesture of understanding. I touched it gently, feeling the weight of history and hurt and healing all contained in this small circle of metal. Then I went to find Kevin to tell him I loved him, to remind myself and him that we'd built something worth protecting. A marriage. A home. A life where boundaries weren't betrayals but the foundation of everything good. The locks on our doors were still changed. The keys still belonged only to us. And inside these walls we were still learning every day what it meant to choose each other, to defend our peace, to love without losing ourselves. Patricia was gone. But the lessons she'd taught us, painful as they were, remained. And maybe that was the best inheritance anyone could leave. Not jewelry or money or property, but the hard-won wisdom that comes from surviving difficult people, and coming out the other side knowing exactly who you are, and what you're worth. I found Kevin in the garage, organizing tools with the same methodical focus he brought to everything. He looked up when I entered, and something in my face made him set down the wrench he was holding. "You okay?" he asked. I walked to him and wrapped my arms around his waist, pressing my face against his chest. "Yeah, I am." He held me, understanding without needing explanation that sometimes you just need to be held by someone who's fought beside you and chosen to stay. Outside, the world continued its ordinary rotation. Inside our home, behind locks that represented safety and choice and the right to control your own space, we stood together in the quiet certainty that whatever came next, we'd face it as partners who'd learned the hardest way possible, how to protect what mattered. The bracelet was cool against my skin. The house was solid around us. And the future stretched ahead, full of ordinary days and simple joys and the hard-won peace that only comes from knowing you can survive the storms and still find your way home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.